If you have a strange or scary story you want to share with the channel, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to send it my way. And of course, thank you. This happened about 15 years back, when my now husband and I were in the first few years of dating. He lived at his parents' place on a 2-acre property at Camden in New South Wales, Australia. When you drove into the driveway, you were facing the front door of the main house, where his parents lived. The driveway then curved to the left, had a slight decline to a dip, and then back up slightly until you reached one of the 4 garage doors at the carport. Due to the height of the top of the driveway, at night, when a car would come in and turn to the left, the headlights would light up the garage and through the windows of the studio flat that sat above it. The studio flat was where my husband and his brother lived. It had a closed-off bathroom at the back, with an open-plan living and kitchen area. And all the windows were on the carport/driveway side of the flat. My husband and I slept in his bed at the back of the flat, then moving towards the door/front of the flat was his brother's bed, then the couch, and then the open floor area in front of the TV, and a kitchen off to the side of that. Then there was a tiled area at the front door. Walking out of the front door, there was a main internal timber door, a screen door, and then you would step onto a piece of checker plate at the top of the external stairs, which would always make a distinctive dong, hollow, metal-like sound. And then that led you to a set of cement stairs that would take you down to the carport. There was a storage area under the stairs, which caused the cement steps to also have a kind of hollow sound. Because of this, it was obvious to hear when someone was walking up or down the stairs. Because it was away from the main house and parents, it was the go-to place to hang out for all of us during our 20s, which sometimes meant visitors at all hours of the night and morning. This sucked for me as I'm a very light sleeper, so if someone came over once I had gone to bed, because of the open-plan living of the flats and nowhere to go to close a door except the bathroom, it meant that I was up again until they left. One Saturday night, it was my husband and I, his brother, one of his mates, and his girlfriend staying in the flat. We had a couple of drinks, but nothing too crazy, and all decided to head to bed fairly early for once. I was in the bed at the back of the flat with my husband. His brother was in his bed, and his mate and girlfriend were on a mattress in the open floor space in front of the TV. We had been asleep for a few hours when I was awakened to the sound of a car door being closed. It sounded quite loud, like it was under the carport. I thought, that's weird. I didn't see any light shine through the flat from the headlights as they drove down the top of the driveway. This is normally quite bright and fills the flat with light, waking me up. This was about 3 a.m., which wasn't unheard of happening, but was a bit of an odd hour of the night for someone to be showing up and still proceed to come up the stairs to the door, when they could see that all the lights were out, and we had clearly gone to bed. I shoved my husband to wake him up, but he was in a deep sleep and barely moved. I got out of bed and walked over to the bathroom window to look to see if I could see a car or anyone. The moon was bright enough that I could make out if there was a person or car in view, but they were most likely under the carport anyway. When I couldn't see anything, I hopped back into the bed, remaining sitting upward to listen out for anything else. Then, I heard a second car door close. Then I heard the sound of heavy feet, like someone wearing big boots, walking up the hollow cement steps, and then reaching the checker plate at the top. I heard the dong-dong as I heard the boots hit the metal plate. I then saw my husband's mate sit up in front of the TV where he was sleeping with his girlfriend. "Hey," I whispered loudly to him. "Are you hearing this?" "Yeah." He responded in an alert and confused tone. I shoved my husband again hard. As he woke up with an annoyed tone in his voice, "What?" he said to me. I responded with, "Someone is at the door." He sat straight up to see his mate sitting up also. As I said, the moon was fairly bright that night, so we could see each other's silhouettes. My husband got up and walked towards where his mate was sitting up in the lounge room. As he neared him, we heard the screen door handle jostle, like someone was pushing on it to unlatch the door. We then heard the distinct creak of the screen door hinge as it was being pulled wide open. My heart was pounding. Although it wasn't completely unusual to have a guest drop past, something about this whole situation had me creeped out. The next logical sound to come after that would have been the timber door handle turning, or, for a guest, a knock on the timber door. But the next thing we heard was the car doors closing again. Not opening, only closing. 2 doors, one after the next. Now, I was thinking, more people must be getting out of the car. How many people are here? My husband grabbed a cricket bat, and his friend grabbed another weapon. I can't remember exactly what it was. They both stood at the door and counted to 3 as they braced themselves for whoever was out there. As soon as they swung the timber door open, they found the screen door closed and latched, which was odd, as we heard it being opened but not closed. They then opened the screen door and proceeded outside to the checker plate landing at the top of the stairs, where there was no one to be seen. They ran down the stairs and both went separate ways around the flat, and then met back up on the other side. No people in sight. No cars in sight. Nothing. They came back up to tell me that there was no one out there and no cars anywhere other than our own, which were all locked. "What?" I exclaimed. I asked my husband's mate what he had heard, and he relayed to me exactly what I had experienced. Car doors shutting, heavy footsteps up the stairs, landing on the checker plate, the screen door opening, and then the car doors closing again. No sound of the door closing and no footsteps back down the stairs. Even if there was someone at the top of the stairs holding the screen door open, he would not have had time to run back down the stairs between the time we heard the screen door to when my husband and his friend opened the door to chase whoever it was. This was a flight of about 20 steps, and at its peak it was about 12 to 15 feet tall. If someone jumped off, they would have hurt themselves, or, at the very least, hit the ground hard enough to make a sound. It had me baffled, and I still think about it to this day, trying to come up with some rational explanation. I will let you know if I ever think of one. So, of the many things in my life that I will do, claim to be a saint is not one of them. Between the ages of 6 and 23, I lived in rural Nebraska. It was the kind of place where the most interesting thing that happened was the neighbor getting a new truck, or the looming threat of a possible tornado coming through the area. There was no in-between, 0 to 60 at a moment's notice, so to speak. During those downtimes, boredom was ever present, and a good portion of teenagers would fall back on anything from video games and whatever cheesy movie cable TV had on at the time, to once-in-a-while crank calls and occasional light shoplifting. Contrary to popular belief, not everybody in these areas tends to the fields. My dad was a long-haul trucker, and my mom was a substitute teacher. This usually meant my mom was hard at work the night before having to teach a class, trying to get the curriculum for the day down, and my dad was usually gone for 2 to 4 days at a time on average. I wouldn't go as far as to say I was a troublemaker, but I wasn't a good kid. As mentioned before, light shoplifting was a thing, and my 5-finger freebies of choice were usually bottles of Steel Reserve or MD 2020. Mad Dog for those of you not in the know. At the time, I was friends with this kid that we all knew as Wally. He was a tag-along for lack of a better term, and usually went along with anything suggested to him due to a desperate need to fit in. Honestly, I wasn't one of those guys that pressured him into doing too many stupid things, but he usually went with me on those shoplifting excursions in order to provide a distraction, and I usually grabbed enough for the two of us. One night, I want to say late April of 1999, it was going like any other. There was Squad on TV, Mom was prepping for an algebra class she had to teach the following morning, and Dad was off hauling produce to some town in New Jersey. I had just gotten my driver's license at the time, and so I got in my beater of a Ford Taurus and picked up Wally so we could do what we usually did. Get absolutely plastered in this abandoned farmhouse, where a good portion of teenagers would hang out and do whatever. It was kind of like an unofficial party spot, and the fact that it hadn't been leveled by a tornado, considering it was in an open field with little to no coverage, was astounding. But there it stood, and there we partied. Thinking back on it, the fact that my parents, or even the shopkeepers in the area, never caught on to what was happening right under their own noses is a little bit more concerning these days. Hindsight is 20/20 after all, and I now know had my parents realized to what degree I was screwing up, well, I'm pretty sure I would have needed a pillow grafted to my hindquarters in order to sit. But I digress. Wally and I hit up the one convenience store in the area, where we knew that the shopkeeper was so cheap that he only had one security camera, and it was facing towards the register. Wally was a year older than me, so 18 at the time, and he distracted the shopkeeper by attempting to buy a pack of Black & Milds, and acting as if they carried a specific flavor that we knew for a fact never existed. So, as this 20-something employee is looking for kiwi strawberry Black & Milds, I do my thing and pocket 2 bottles of blue raspberry flavored Mad Dog 2020. I clear my throat as I grab a Zagnut bar off the candy rack. Wally says, "Never mind, I'll just take the vanilla flavored," and makes his purchase before going back out to the car in order to wait for me. I buy the candy bar and tell the shopkeep to have a nice night while playing it cool. The whole time, they're none the wiser. It was a system that worked, and had worked, since I started drinking 2 years prior. Like a charm, every single time. So he and I get out to this farmhouse, and we're having a great time. All the while, we're demolishing those 2 bottles of cheap booze, and a few people brought some other refreshments, most of which had varying degrees of legality, and though we stayed away from anything medicinal, we didn't turn down the occasional bottle or can of beer that was offered to us. I start having a drunken conversation about punk rock with a friend of mine from music class, and Wally disappears for a while with this girl he had a crush on. He comes back about an hour and some change later with an ear-to-ear grin on his face, bragging to me about how he disproved a little theory about how alcohol affects performance. He tells me the girl's name, and I realize that she has a boyfriend. Before I go any further into the story, let me preface the remainder of the tale by telling you, according to Wally, she told him that the 2 of them were on break, and the boyfriend never actually comes into play. What happens is far worse. The farmhouse was almost a good half an hour away from where I lived, and after we sobered up a bit, we realized it was getting late, and we started to head home. I'd say we were about 15 to 20 minutes away from Wally's house, which was right at the end of the street from me, when he tells me he feels like his bladder is going to burst. Realizing that there's not really anywhere to stop for us because we hit this point where it's really nothing but a couple of dairy farms and sprawling fields, I tell him I'm going to pull over to the side of the road so he can take a leak. But he needs to be as covert about it as possible. The last thing we need was for somebody to drive by and see him in public, only to report him to the cops, resulting in us being busted for underage drinking because the smell of liquor on our breath was quite palpable. So I'm sitting behind the wheel of my car, keeping watch so I can honk the horn just in case anything suspect happens. And in a moment that still causes me nightmares, it happens. I still remember him wearing that San Francisco 49ers starter jacket and khaki cargo pants. He's standing there wiggling his hips and doing his business, and nothing weird is happening. But suddenly, I see him go rigid for a couple of seconds, and he just collapses to the ground. At first, I thought he was just screwing with me. I honked the horn a couple of times and screamed out, "Real funny, man. Come on, let's get going." No response. He didn't move an inch. I started freaking out and immediately started sobering up. Remembering I had a flashlight in my glove box, I grabbed it in order to have a better look at what was going on. I walk up to Wally and I'm immediately hit with the smell of burning hair. I look down at my friend with the flashlight on him and I can see that he's pale as a ghost. I get down on my knees and I start slapping him in the face. 5 or 6 slaps in, he starts coming to, but he's not with it. I don't think whatever had just happened completely registered at the time, but as I'm trying to make sense of it, I hear this low buzz. I shine my flashlight over to the direction of it, and that's when I see it. In the spot where Wally was relieving himself, I saw liquid dripping off of a wire between a couple of fence posts. I really had to take a look to see it because that spot was also overgrown with weeds. Wally had urinated on a semi-concealed electric fence. Now, the thing that didn't make sense is that both of us had been dared to take a whiz on an electric fence before, and it's pretty common knowledge that they don't really have enough output to do any real damage. Sure, you might get shocked and it might hurt, but you're not putting your life in your hands despite popular belief. So this didn't make sense to me. Something else was present, and it caused my friend to lose consciousness long enough for me to have to literally slap him awake. And now, here I am attempting to help him pull up his pants so I can get him in the car. And all I smell is burnt hair. I'm not ashamed to say, I shined the flashlight on his groin, and I immediately knew that I had to get him to the hospital. He's got, at the very least, second-degree burns on his inner thighs. And, well, do I really have to tell you where else? By now, I'm as sober as a judge, and I'm heading towards the county general. By the grace of God, it wasn't too far away from us. I was cooking up a story in my head in order to tell the doctors literally anything other than my friend was taking a drunk piss on an electric fence. But I couldn't think of anything. I knew we were in deep water once our parents found out, but that was the least of my concerns. Wally starts fading in and out of consciousness, and in the moments where he's lucid, he's crying his eyes out. The pain is starting to hit him, and I don't know what to do. In my mind, I'm doing the right thing by heading to the hospital, and I'm counting the seconds until we arrive. In what seemed like an eternity, we finally pull into the parking lot. I speed up to the emergency room entrance and run inside screaming for a nurse and a wheelchair. I explain that my friend has been electrocuted, and before I knew it, one of the attending physicians and a nurse take off like a shot towards my car with the wheelchair in hand. They get him to the back, and I explain the situation. Even the doctor looked perplexed when I mentioned that I suspected an electric fence did this. But lo and behold, once they got him to the back, a few of my suspicions were confirmed. He was pretty badly burned on his inner thighs. Everything else connected had its fair share of burns, but was nowhere near as bad, thankfully for him. The doctor asked me my age, and when I told him I was 17, he told me that I would have to either get my parents or Wally's down to the emergency room. I made what was possibly the hardest phone call of my teenage life. Wally's mom answered, and I told her she needed to get down to the ER because her son had an accident. She started freaking out, as you would expect. What parent wants to hear that? She told me to stay put and to call my parents and tell them what was going on. And that's exactly what I did. Wally had to be hospitalized for over a week. The doctors needed to make sure the burns didn't get infected, and they also wanted to monitor his vitals. This is when Wally's mom would tell me that he had a heart arrhythmia. I never knew about this. That would explain him passing out and all, but it didn't explain the burns. His mom finally asked me if I could narrow down where we were when all of this happened, and despite my semi-sober state at the time, I was able to recollect almost exactly where we were due to the tacky mailbox that stood out right by the field. I came home after school one day, and my mom was hanging up the phone. She told me to sit down, and I honestly expected the worst possible news. Thankfully, she wasn't about to tell me that my friend had passed away, but she was about to tell me something that helped the entire situation make far more sense. When Wally was relieving himself, he did in fact pee on that fence. What neither of us realized, though, was that there was a bit of exposed underground cable in those weeds. The wiring had been chewed away by mice or whatever was living in the field at the time, and the owner has complained to the electric company about occasional brownouts on his property. Wally's mom and dad would attempt to pursue legal action against the electric company due to poor maintenance, but nothing came of it. As far as the company and the courts were concerned, this was a freak thing, and they had no way of knowing about it, despite the neighbors' protests. Life went on as usual, and Wally took his time healing. Eventually, he came clean to his parents about everything. Well, almost. He told them that the alcohol came into play at the party and that I was his designated driver. Despite the fact that he was legally an adult, he still lived under their roof, and they forbade him from ever going out to that farmhouse and partying the way he did that night, ever again. And speaking of that party, and that night, the girl that ended up hooking up with him that night showed up at his parents' house looking for him about 3 months later. She let him know that she was pregnant. She had broken up with her boyfriend for good shortly after that night, and he had no idea. You want to talk about walking on eggshells? Wally decided to be there for her entire pregnancy, under the condition that a DNA test was done once the baby was born. Even though he was looking at serious life changes, he was relieved to find out that the little girl in his arms was in fact his daughter. Fatherhood changed him for the better. He ended up going to a trade school and getting a fairly good job doing farm equipment repair. It was enough to pay his bills and cover his child support. Though the mother of the daughter didn't want him to bear that burden, the state had other ideas. But I was proud to learn that not only had he stepped up to the plate, that little girl was his entire life. Gone were the days of partying, trying to seek out friendship wherever he could get it. His little Olivia had him wrapped around her finger. For a while, I couldn't say the same thing about myself. He and I fell out of touch after I moved out of the area, but my habits followed. I became a barely functioning alcoholic well into my late 20s. Had it not been for a couple of DUIs, a health scare, and a suspended license, I don't think I would have gotten my act together. But after we had a new arrival at my AA meeting, share his story about how he'd become paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident where alcohol was involved, it was the overall catalyst for me to start getting my crap together. Not too long ago, I actually celebrated 20 years sober. I haven't looked back since. Wally and I reconnected through social media 5 years back, and it was almost as if the friendship never took a pause. He has 3 children now, and the little girl that helped him get his life together is now an adult working as a cosmetologist in Aberdeen, Washington. Wally and his wife settled down not too far away from that location, and after a long-awaited reunion where I went out and visited them last year, I can honestly say that Lydia is a wonderful woman. I try not to think about that night too much, but as I stated earlier, it does sneak up on me from time to time, whether it be in the form of a nightmare or any time I hear electrical buzzing. I could throw a cop-out your way and say that that night is what drove me to drink, but I'd be lying. I was well on my way to being a barely functional drunk long before then. I'm just glad things worked out for the better. Well, better than they could have. I don't want to think about how badly things could have gone that night, along that desolate stretch of Nebraska road. When I was about 13 years old, I had a weird dream. In the dream, I was in a strange house. Everything was hazy and brownish, like a dark space with wood paneling. I was walking from room to room. Each room's detail was hazy and indistinct. It also felt like I was looking through someone else's eyes. It was so weird to me. As I walked through the room, I would see various strange people. In one room, there was a wolf man in a long coat, like a peacoat, just standing there holding a bag. In another, there were two little, well, I don't know what to call them, just monstrous little figures. These two were laughing and giggling. They ran up to me and said something. Whoever I was looking through threw their head back and a distorted laugh came out. It was deep and slow. I think the Freddy Fazbear kind of chuckle. In the next room, there was a soldier of some type. He was bundled up in cold weather gear, complete with a face mask. He was checking his gear in the mirror. He looked over at me and said something, and I responded. I have no idea what was said, but I shook my head no and moved on. In the last room, there was a medical table-like thing, and on it was a Frankenstein-like monster. At the head end of the table was a doctor who was working on the monster. This was where the dream ended. That morning, I woke up and told both my mom and sister about the weird dream. We all tried to figure it out, but that came to nothing. We had a habit of trying to figure out what influenced our dreams. Like, what events could cause the strange imagery. The only conclusion we could come to was that we might be moving again and somehow this was a stress dream from that. Well, weeks later, it was Halloween. My parents and sister had left to go on a trip to where my dad was looking at getting a new job, Detroit, Oregon, if I remember right. I stayed with my buddy, because it might be the last Halloween we got to spend together. In fact, this was an event. His parents had an RV that was hooked up to power, and not just me, but all of our friends were staying the night. That night, about an hour before we were going out, was when the dream became real. I was walking through the house. My costume was a modern take on the Grim Reaper. I had a skull mask that came in two parts that was glued to my face. You just used black makeup on the parts it didn't cover. It was an easy costume. A black hoodie, and skeleton gloves for the look. And I had a practice kama to complete the costume. A kama is a small scythe-like weapon from Asia. Mine was wood, not metal. To add to the costume, I had put small yellow-orange LEDs by the eye holes, and it made my eyes light up. I could still see, but it was blurry and hazy. My buddy C was going as the classic Wolfman. We lived in northern Nevada, and it was cold on Halloween. We even had snow before on Halloween. That was why he was also in a long coat. My buddy A had two little twin brothers. They were made up as little deformed monsters. For some reason, we named the two monsters Eeg and Gore, like Igor but split into two parts. They made a joke about bringing me plenty of people that night, and I laughed. My buddy A was in the next room dressing up as a cold weather soldier. The snow pants, ski mask, the whole thing. Finally, my buddy E was lying on the kitchen table, while A's dad finished putting the makeup on to make him look like Frankenstein. If you're wondering about why he was lying down, well, if you've ever tried to put makeup on a person while standing, it can be done. However, roll a towel, putting it under the neck and having them lay down on a table to put the makeup on also helps with the lighting. This was in the days before ring lights and chairs that would tilt back properly were affordable. So my dream seemed to be a prophetic one. The last time my friends and I ever got together like that. This was all the way back in the early 90s. I think we moved up to Centralia, Washington sometime after the new year. The Oregon job wasn't something my dad wanted, but he did find one in Washington. Anyway, we had a great night trick-or-treating, even playing poker with the candy. Don't worry, whoever won, we just split it evenly with everyone at the end. That way we all got the same amount of candy and got to have fun with it. I hope you like this story. It's a memory that comes back around Halloween every year. Hey Raven. Hopefully my story will serve as a fitting addition to the impressive collection thus far. I listen to these stories very often now, but this will be my first submission. I love your channel and keep up the great work. Thank you. My anecdote requires a bit of exposition, so bear with me, if you please. Back in the early 2000s, my dear maternal grandmother passed away quietly in her home. Since I can remember, my family and I had lived across the street from her. It was a treat for the entire family, really. Grandma could sneak across the street to pilfer garden-grown vegetables from us. My parents could send us to her place, whenever, practically, and we kids really loved her quite a lot. She was a brusque, fiery woman, but she knew how to love us, too, stern as she could be. When I was about 10, my mother suddenly went over to Grandma's house one morning to check in on her. I remember my mom looked a little panicked. She and Grandma used to speak on the phone every morning first thing. This morning, however, my mom did not get a call. I remember trying to go into Grandma's house after my mother. I remember just blindly following her because I could feel it in my bones that something was wrong. I could hear her screaming and sobbing from outside. She yelled at me to not enter the house, whatever I did. I'm not sure what I did next, really, but I remember being in quite a shock, and pretty frightened. I think I just stood there and waited, if memory serves. Following the loss, my mother was hurting in a pretty bad way. I feel like anyone would be if you had your mom so close all the time, and suddenly found her gone. It's a tough thing. In the months following Grandma's passing, a couple of interesting incidents took place. One foggy morning, a few weeks after the funeral, my mom abruptly left our house while making breakfast in the kitchen. She looked absolutely entranced by something outside. I was too small to see out the kitchen window above the sink, but I did scoot over to the door and followed my mom out, curious as to where she was going in such a hurried way. I followed her up the block a bit, into the middle of the street where she was standing still now, pointing ahead of her into the fog of the morning and saying, "Mom?" I looked on and didn't see anything or anyone in the road. "Mom, is that you?" my mother yelled. She was crying now. I still didn't see anyone or anything, but my mom did eventually turn around. She noticed me standing there in a state of childlike awe and confusion, and told me that she was 100% certain she had just seen her mother wandering slowly about the street. She even recognized the outfit Grandma had on: pale green linen shorts and a long denim tunic top with a pink butterfly embroidered on the front. The final occurrence happened when my parents began settling Grandma's affairs. Eventually, an estate sale was held at my grandma's house, And before it took place, my mom let my siblings and I look around and pick out anything of Grandma's that we wanted to keep to remember her by. We started off in the kitchen, and my mom exclaimed. She pointed to the large bay window in the center of the room. Grandma always had beautiful crystal figures hanging in that window. When I looked up at it, I saw one butterfly crystal dancing and spinning wildly. It looked like it was being blown about by a terrible wind. Its movement was casting all kinds of beautiful rays of rainbows all around the room. It really was a sight, especially since the air in that room was otherwise completely still. There was no breeze to make that thing fling about the way that it was. I noticed my mom watching the spectacle with a smile, like she knew a secret that none of us were privy to. Finally, we had finished our last tour of Grandma's house without any other events. We made our way back through the kitchen and into the entryway, each of us with hands full of different treasures that would help us keep Grandma in close remembrance. I remember feeling so sad in that moment. Right when we opened the front door, music began to play. "Mom?" my mother softly asked. She splayed her arm in front of us kids protectively and gestured for us to stay put. I watched her make her way back into the kitchen. She leaned onto the kitchen table and smirked. We watched her too from the doorway. She was smiling at a handcrafted jewelry box that sat atop the table. One of those old school ones that plays the dainty classical music. It was a nostalgic sound, even then. My mom said finally, "I knew it was you, Mom," and smiled once more at the box. Alright kids, back to our place. I remember then we all went home. I remember feeling a little better after that, seeing my mom smile like that, and I remember wondering, was that really you, Grandma? This happened when I was around 7 years old. I'm 15 as of writing this. It was my grandma's house. The day felt normal and I was there with my two brothers. My grandparents' house is pretty old, but they were the only people that have been living in the house, as they were the ones that planned to build it. In that specific day, I felt calmer than normal. I've always been a calm and quiet kid. I said hi to my grandparents like normal. My little brother ran upstairs to get my grandpa's tablet before me, but I didn't care. Normally I would have been annoyed, but instead I just went to the living room. I sat on the couch and turned on the TV. My older brother sat on the other couch in the living room and was on his phone. We'd been there for a bit. You could hear a lot from the living room, like my little brother running around upstairs. Both my grandparents were up there with him, and my older brother had gotten up to go upstairs too. I was watching YouTube on the TV. I don't know why, but I started getting goosebumps on my neck, and I started feeling anxious. A little bit into the video, I accidentally turned off the TV. Then everything went quiet. It was too quiet. So I thought that my grandpa went to the 7-Eleven nearby with my brothers. As I turned the TV back on, two big white gloves slowly moved into my peripheral vision. I've never reacted so quickly in my life. I quickly stood up and turned around. I backed up from the couch. The gloves looked like the classic cartoon white gloves. I ran through the kitchen and up the stairs. The most unsettling thing was when I looked away from the couch and ran. As I ran through the kitchen, I got chills and goosebumps on my neck again. It felt like something was behind me. Going up the stairs, I instinctively turned around, and I saw a white glove quickly move back around the corner. Honestly, I was on the brink of tears. I got up the stairs and saw everyone was up there minding their own business. My older brother had experiences with paranormal things, so I went to him and asked him to come downstairs with me. I don't know what made me want to go back downstairs, but going back down there, behind my brother, we walked through the kitchen and into the living room. We didn't see anything, so we started going back upstairs. I was going to check behind the couch, but I don't know if it was instinct or paranoia. Instead of checking, I just followed my brother looking back to make sure whatever it was didn't follow me again. I told my brother all about it, and he listened, seemingly understanding, but I'm not sure if he believed me. Hey Raven, I hope you are doing well. So, I have a scary story for you. Back in April, I was taking a nap in my dorm room, and I woke up from my nap, but as it turns out, I must have still been dreaming, 'cause I saw ghostly students and staff that I met before, but they were out of place, dressed like World War II soldiers with bloody uniforms, and the staff of nurses and one student walked by. And I said, "You all aren't supposed to be in my room. What are you doing in my room?" One soldier and a nurse turned around to stare at me blindly for a minute that felt like forever, and then they turned back around to walk through my mirror and disappeared. Now, keep in mind this was a military hospital during the World War II era in Fisherville, Virginia. My campus is called Woodrow Wilson Workforce Center. I actually have a part 2 to this. So I was taking a nap once again, several months later, and I heard the door to my dorm, my closet, and my bathroom all shake loudly. I got up in a panic, and then I heard footsteps outside of my room into the suite. I walked closer to my closet, and I then heard a deep male voice say, "Shut up and get out." Then I opened my door, and no one was in the hall. So I shut my door and locked it. Fast forward to now, I actually have a new dorm room in a modern, newer dorm area, and I haven't witnessed any more hauntings since. So, that, my friends, it was a collection of some strange and scary stories from you. This is not a strange and story collection. I am a liar. This is a true scary stories from you collection. What's the difference, you ask? Well, strange and scary stories can come from anywhere. Reddit, you guys, email, other places where I get stories. Or, the alternative, true scary stories from you, exclusively come from you through my website and email. Both, typically. These are not from people who don't know the channel. These are from people who specifically wanted me to narrate their stories. So, that, my friends, is the difference in my silly little way of doing things. It's a true scary story collection from listeners at this point. So, yeah. Fantastic stories. And hopefully, you all enjoyed this collection. If you did, please consider hitting that thumbs up button, the like button for the video. You can also subscribe to the channel if you're new and enjoyed what you heard. Or, you can leave me a comment down below the video, letting me know why you're not subscribed to the channel. And if you're already subscribed, let me know why you subscribed? I don't know. You can say whatever you want. Comment section's pretty much open game. But yeah. Hopefully, you all enjoyed the stories. I really hope you did. Please tell me you did. Or don't. It's up to you. You can tell me you didn't enjoy them if you didn't. That's totally fine. I'm okay with it. I can take it. I'm a tough boy. I promise. Anyways. Subscribe if you're new and liked what you heard. Comments. Join Patreon and memberships to get early access to content like this. Patreon links down in the description. Membership button is the join button under the video. You can also do a super thanks, which is a tip to the channel. Never expected, always appreciated. You can listen elsewhere, such as Pandora, Audible, Apple Podcasts, so forth and so on. Spotify is a big one. You can also buy hand-signed posters of 3 designs from the coffee shop that's down below in the video description. That's KOFI. There are 3 designs now, all the same price. If you order more than 1 design, you get free shipping on the other 2, just so you know. I do not charge extra if you buy 3 posters. You don't pay shipping for all 3. You pay a flat rate shipping of $7.95, I believe. I think. That sounds right. I don't know. Anyways, you pay a flat rate shipping for as many posters as you buy. You can buy all 3 of them and get the shipping for 1. Pay for shipping for 1, yeah. Anyway. I hope that you all remember that you are loved, that you are valid, that you are important. The best you that you can be. Do not forget it and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And my friends, until next time. Much love and sleep well.